This video is sponsored by Nebula, the thoughtful streaming service created by me and my creator friends. Check out the link in the description or stay tuned to learn more. It's not every day that I do an explainer video on a truly enormous system. In fact, I'd say I've only done a handful of explainers on such cities and their metros, from Tokyo to Shanghai and Seoul. But today comes another video on a massive city that most people had never heard of just 10 or 15 years ago. My Christmas gift to you, as it were. These days, the city has a metro that manages to be in the top 10 in the world for its length and number of stations, and the top 5 for ridership. Oh, and it only opened 2 short decades ago. Shenzhen is an absolutely gargantuan city. It's larger than life, and while it has gained more name recognition, I think in the future it will be counted among the greatest cities in the world, around the world, up there with New York, London, and Tokyo. So let's look at Shenzhen and its unbelievable metro system. Welcome to RM Transit, where we talk about transit systems that are really big. Subscribe and consider supporting the channel on Patreon so I can bring you more videos. Shenzhen is a city in southern China directly north of Hong Kong, and famous for its technology and electronics manufacturing prowess. The city, or maybe more accurately called a town, had 30,000 people in 1980, 1.5 million a decade later in 1990, and today close to 20 million, with a large part formed by migrants from across China. And Shenzhen is just a part, albeit a big part, of China's Greater Bay Area, a massive urban region stretching about 150 kilometers north-south and east-west surrounding the Pearl River Delta. That includes Guangzhou, Hong Kong, Macau, Dongguan, Foshan, Jiangmen, Zhongshan, and Zhuhai. The total population of this region, over 80 million people, and it makes up more than 10% of China's entire GDP. If you think Tokyo is amazing, this region is probably going to be the world's next Tokyo. And a lot of that is thanks to Shenzhen. The city has the third largest economy of any city in China and is absolutely massive for tech, being home to huge amounts of manufacturing and the logistics to support that, including an enormous port. But Shenzhen is also home to big tech companies these days, with companies like Huawei, BYD, Tencent, DJI, and ZTE located here. And unlike the US's tech hub of Silicon Valley, where massive companies are often based out of giant suburban office parks, in Shenzhen, the companies are often headquartered in ostentatious landmark skyscrapers. In fact, Shenzhen is also one of the world's skyscraper capitals, with over 450 buildings over 150 meters tall and over 20 super tall skyscrapers, as well as the world's 5th tallest tower. And the city isn't all work. It's covered in parks and green spaces, including quite a few golf courses in central areas, as well as amusement parks and beaches, perfect given the tropical climate. Large parts of the city are also hilly and mountainous, reminding me of both Hong Kong to the south, as well as Seoul and Shanghai, with development wrapping around and tunnels passing underneath the mountains. The actual borders of Shenzhen stretch over 80 kilometers east-west and up to 40 kilometers or so north-south, running up against Hong Kong to the south with coastlines to both its east and west. By comparison, the city is rather squat north-south. And as you'd expect, the city has many major transportation hubs, including the more minor Shenzhen Railway Station, which sits along the Guangshen Railway from Guangzhou and Shenzhen to Hong Kong, right on the border, as well as Futian Railway Station, located in south-central Shenzhen, which is a more modern underground station for high-speed trains on the express rail link into Hong Kong and its West Kowloon terminus. There's also the massive modern above-ground high-speed rail station that is Shenzhen North, which sits in the city's north, separated from the center by the mountains in the middle of the city, and the modernized Shenzhen East Railway Station, which is also on the Guangshen Railway. Shenzhen, like many large Chinese cities, also has an enormous and iconic airport, known as Shenzhen Bao'an International, which moves over 50 million yearly passengers and enormous amounts of cargo, including large amounts of electronics, of course. The airport sits in the west of the city and extends into the Pearl River estuary, with an elevated highway built over the water to its west. Now, for a brief moment of bridge geekery, you know that crazy 55-kilometer bridge that was built from Hong Kong to Zhuhai and Macau? Well, they actually just built another similar roughly 50-kilometer bridge across the bay from Zhongshan to Shenzhen that makes landfall right near the airport. While there is sadly no rail on either bridge, there are many buses. Now, I've already mentioned that Shenzhen has a crazy number of high-rises, but it also has many central business districts, of which I'll highlight the 4 largest. The city's main central business district and true city center is Futian, which sits just north of the border with Hong Kong and the western terminus of the MTR's East Rail Line. This district is home to the Ping An Finance Center, which at just shy of 600 meters tall is the 5th tallest building in the world. Futian also plays host to the underground Futian Railway Station on the Guangzhou-Shenzhen-Hong Kong Express Rail Link. The pinnacle of Shenzhen's famous electronics industry is the Huaqiangbei Electronics Market, the world's largest, which sits in a dense neighborhood east of Futian. East of Huaqiangbei is the Luohu CBD, home to the KK100 skyscraper, which at 441 meters tall is in the top 30 tallest buildings in the world, as well as Shenzhen Station on the Guangshen Railway. Being like Futian, just north of the Hong Kong border, Luohu is also connected to the MTR, but in this case to the eastern branch of the East Rail Line. To the west of Futian is another major business district known as Chegongmiao, which sits near the end of Shenzhen Bay. In the southwest of the city, to the east and north of the mountains that mark the city's southwestern extent, are two more modern central business districts. Hohai, which faces into Shenzhen Bay and is home to the massive Shenzhen Bay Sports Center complex, and the China Resources Building, which is a nearly 400-meter tall skyscraper, which I might call the Pointy Gherkin, and Qianhai, which sits to the northwest and is a totally master-planned new central business district on Dachan Bay, surrounded by huge parks and facing out to Shenzhen's largest port, packed with enough high-rises to give Chicago a run for its money. Like, seriously, this place is bananas. Qianhai is actually not far from Shenzhen West Station, but this station is only for rather limited legacy low-speed train services. But we're here to talk about what's underground, mostly, and that's the Shenzhen Metro. Shenzhen's metro started running in 2004, meaning I am older than it, and these days it has over 7 million daily riders, 16 lines, 373 stations, and over 550 kilometers of track, more than the London Underground on every single metric. The network is already the 5th biggest in China and the 6th in the world, and it's growing so fast that it might actually end up being part of the world's biggest metro system down the road, but we'll touch on that later. The Shenzhen Metro, like most metros in East Asia, has a distance-based fare system, supplemented by free fares for children and the elderly. It also has cell service everywhere and multilingual announcements in Mandarin, Cantonese, and English, as well as a surprisingly familiar logo. And the MTR influence runs deep. Shenzhen Metro connects with it after all, with MTR running more than one of Shenzhen's lines, Shenzhen having quite a few lovely cross-platform transfers, and even several train yards with entire communities of high-rise towers on top. With Shenzhen's hilly coastal landscape, it can sometimes look an awful lot like its sibling down south. Of course, as you'd expect, the entirety of the Shenzhen Metro is standard gauge, has modern digital signaling, platform screen doors everywhere, and even a handful of fully automated lines. It also has a combination of local and express lines that you'll see in other Chinese cities like Guangzhou and Chengdu. Essentially, some lines on the network are your typical run-of-the-mill urban metros with a roughly 80 km/h top speed, while others, which are mostly indistinguishable by their trains and stations, have much higher top speeds and fewer stations, allowing for rapid cross-city travel. Let's start by taking a look at the local lines. Line 1 was one of Shenzhen's first metro lines, opening in 2004, and runs 41 kilometers from Luohu CBD and the connection to the East Rail Line at Shenzhen Station, west across the city via Futian and Chegongmiao to Qianhai, where the line has an absolutely massive, nearly 2-kilometer long yard, which is topped with 50 high-rise apartment towers. Continuing on, Line 1 turns north and eventually pops above ground to run elevated east of Bao'an Airport, terminating above ground next to the former and much smaller terminals at Airport East. Line 1 moves over 1 million people a day through its 30 stations and uses standard 6-car A-type trains based on the 5-door per car design that originated on the MTR in Hong Kong and then standardized across China, which is also the de facto standard in Shenzhen. Trains on Line 1, like those on most lines of Shenzhen's metro, are powered by 1500-volt DC overhead wires. Line 2 is weird because it's a combined line with Line 8. The eastern half of the line is called Line 8, which opened in 2020, while the western half is called Line 2, which opened in 2010. I'm going to refer to the whole thing as Line 2 and talk about their stats in a combined manner. Line 2, like Line 1, is another big east-west line that runs 52 kilometers from the far southwestern port of Shenzhen, north and east to Hohai, crossing north of Line 1 to wrap around Chegongmiao, and then heading east through Futian, with a connection to the station of the same name, and Luohu into the east of the city, where the line changes to Line 8 beyond Liantang Station. The Line 8 section of the line is a very different character, running along the border with Hong Kong and serving various settlements, first squeezed between the mountains and the border, and then through Yantian District and beyond, lying between the mountains and the ocean on Shenzhen's east coast. I have to say, there is something incredibly cool about a metro line that can take you to a super dense, cyberpunk-esque concrete jungle on one end and to tropical beaches surrounded by mountains on the other. Like on Line 1, Line 2 and 8 use 6-car A-type trains, albeit on a totally underground route with 43 stations. Line 3 opened in 2010 and runs 44 kilometers from southwest Futian north and east around the district's edge to northern Luohu, before turning north and popping above ground to run elevated over an expressway next to the Guangshen Railway, up to Shenzhen East Station. From here, the line winds along the expressway, which turns into a broad avenue that the line runs both elevated over and underneath in tunnels to the far northeast of the city, with dense development around many stations and loads of sky bridges linking stations directly to said development. Line 3 has a total of 31 stations along its radial route and manages over 1 million riders per day, who load into smaller 6-car B-type trains, which are actually not that common in Shenzhen. It also has a higher than normal top speed of 90 km per hour, which is useful particularly for the long stretches of the line along the expressway that don't have stations. Also rather unusual, Line 3 uses 1500-volt DC third rail for power, like some lines in Shanghai. Line 4 opened in 2004 with Line 1, and is our first north-south line. Today, it runs a total of 31 kilometers with 23 stations, northwest from Futian Checkpoint with a connection to the MTR's East Rail Line through Futian and under the mountains to the north, where it pops above ground to run elevated through the Shenzhen North Station headhouse next to an array of high-speed tracks, which is pretty awesome. North of Shenzhen North, Line 4 remains elevated and runs through the suburban Longhua district over wide streets, before diving back underground and terminating to the northeast. Now, you can find a rather interesting connecting transit service in Longhua, and that's the Shenzhen Tram, which feels a lot like the Songjiang Tram in Shanghai, an isolated suburban tram system connected to a single metro line at multiple points. The Shenzhen Tram has 2 routes, with 21 stops over nearly 12 kilometers of mostly green track, with the 1 route running from Xinghu Station up to Guanlan Station, and the 2 route running from Qinghu to the northeast. The trams on the system are 100% low floor and use supercapacitors charging at stations with no overhead wire for the rest of the route, sort of like some trams in Australia. Back to Line 4, the route is actually operated by the MTR, whose logos are all over the place, and its wayfinding and station names as well as announcements definitely give off that vibe, as does the line's giant yard in the north that is decked over with residential apartments. Initially when the line opened, it only featured 4-car trains, but these days all services are run with 6-car Type A trains. Line 5 opened in 2011 and transformed the Shenzhen Metro with a new orbital route that connects Qianhai and Luohu without passing through Futian. Instead, Line 5's 47-kilometer route bypasses Futian and the center of Shenzhen entirely, running north from Line 2 in the east, linking up with Line 3, and traveling west to connect to Line 4 and Shenzhen North Station north of the mountains, before popping above ground in a mountain valley, serving dense housing estates along the hillsides, including a big one built on top of one of Line 5's train yards. From here, the line continues west and southwest to central Qianhai, and further south to the southwesternmost point of the city, where it wraps around another mountain to connect to Line 2 at its western terminus. And while it might seem like Line 5's 34-station route might be one of Shenzhen's lesser-used lines, with its circuitous path from east to west through valleys and around mountains, the opposite is actually the case. Line 5 moves over 1 million riders a day. Orbital lines really do just often punch so far above their weight, though the direct connections from Shenzhen North to 2 of Shenzhen's key business districts certainly doesn't hurt. Line 6 feels like a version of Line 5 bent out of shape. Starting on the other side of Luohu on the west, it heads north passing under the mountains and then popping above ground to run right next to Line 4, elevated through Shenzhen North Station. From Shenzhen North, Line 6 runs northwest, crossing over Line 4 and popping in and out of tunnels onto elevated viaducts to pass under hills and mountains, and eventually some denser neighborhoods on the way to its northern terminus in the far northwest of the city. I do have to once again point out that Line 6 has a rail yard with a deck and high-rise towers built on top of it, and this one is really big, with over 20 different apartment towers sitting on top of the facilities where trains are stored and maintained, making good use of scarce urban space. Line 6 is a recent arrival, opening in 2020, and the line is the longest non-express line in the city, at 49.5 kilometers of track with just 27 stations, a really wide station spacing, which along with an unusually high top speed of 100 kilometers per hour makes Line 6 feel semi-express. The trains, while rather standard 6-car A sets, are unique with a 1500-volt third rail power system, although they do use overhead wires in yards for worker safety. Line 7 opened in 2016, and it totals 30 kilometers, cutting across the city east-west entirely underground in a broad U-shape. In the west, the line starts in a valley between some of Shenzhen's mountains, before heading southeast to Shegongmiao, and further east through southern Futian before heading back northeast. It's the Toronto Line 1 to Shenzhen Line 2, if you will. Line 7 uses 6-car A-type trains and has a total of 27 stations. Line 9 is also totally underground, and I might call it the wavy Line 2, which is kind of half of the Shenzhen Metro if we're honest, with its 36-kilometer route that starts in Qianhai and runs east, waving north and south through Hohai and missing a connection with Line 2, which is a sign of things to come. East of Hohai, Line 9 dives south to run along Shenzhen Bay, before passing north through Shegongmiao and running further north around the edge of Futian. In the east, Line 9 runs south through Lohu near the border with Hong Kong. Line 9 has a total of 32 stations and opened in 2016. Line 10 opened in 2020, and is a refreshing change of pace because it's a 24-station, 29-kilometer all-underground north-south line, which runs north from a connection with Line 4 and the East Rail Line at Futian Checkpoint, across the mountains and further north and east to the Guangshen Railway, where it connects to Pinghu Station before terminating. Line 10 is interesting because it uses 8-car A-type trains, the biggest of any local metro line in Shenzhen, and appropriate with its central route through Futian. Line 12 is, as you might have guessed it, all underground, and like Line 10, it runs north-south. The route, which opened in 2022 and is a total of 41 kilometers, runs from the ports and huge ferry terminal at Shenzhen's southwestern corner north, passing through the center of Qianhai and east of the Shenzhen airport, where it connects to the terminus of Line 1 and then beyond to the Shenzhen World area to the northwest, where the line terminates near the enormous convention center, new man-made islands, and a huge emerging urban district. Line 12 has 33 stations in total, and while its trains are mostly standard, they are also fully driverless. Our last local Shenzhen metro line for now is Line 16, which is rather odd because its 29-kilometer entirely underground route is all in the northeastern suburbs of the city. Line 16 opened in 2022 and runs from Universiade Station on Line 3, named for the 2011 World University Games in Shenzhen, whose modest above-ground structure has recently been augmented by an enormous underground addition that can only be called ridiculous and feels like the inside of an alien spacecraft. North of Universiade, Line 16 runs in a loop north and east back to Line 3, and then east and southeast serving the far northeastern districts of the city with 24 stations. Sort of like with Line 4, Line 16 is augmented along the way with a connecting local transit line, the Pingshan Sky Shuttle, which is an elevated automated people mover line using proprietary technology from Chinese company BYD. The line, which is 8.5 kilometers with 11 stations, connects to Line 16 in 2 places and links up a ton of BYD offices as well as a massive factory on its south end. Now, with the local network out of the way, we can see the Shenzhen Metro's core routes, with most running east-west, a few running north-south, and a few lines like Line 5, 6, and 12 creating orbital connections between parts of Shenzhen that are further inland and the densely developed regions in the south and west. In some places like Futian, the network forms a grid, while in other places like Qianhai, it's a chaotic mess of lines crossing and interfacing with one another. On the whole, you might have noticed station spacings are quite wide, befitting of this big city, but I think it's also interesting how many lines, radial or otherwise, make connections to other lines, people movers or trams, or even high-speed or just regular railway stations in the city's outskirts, all funneling more people onto the metro. Beyond the local lines, Shenzhen also has a number of express metro lines that have both a higher top speed of 120 km per hour and much wider stop spacings, shrinking this massive city. And because the express services are coarse and serve all manner of trips that might start or end on a local metro line, many of the lines have among the highest capacities in the system. The first express line in Shenzhen to open was Line 11 in 2016. Line 11 has a 53-kilometer route that starts in Futian, runs west through Shegongmiao, Hohai, and Qianhai, and then turns north and becomes elevated to head to the airport, which it serves directly, and then continuing to the far north of the city as an elevated line running through dense residential districts. Line 11 has just 19 stations and connects Futian with the airport in just half an hour, which is really quick, despite the line being currently speed restricted due to some infrastructure problems. And unlike many airport express lines, Line 11 really forms a backbone for all of Shenzhen and the entire metro, and thus it has 8-car Type A trains to provide the capacity it needs. Though interestingly, 2 of the cars feature suburban-style transverse seating and business class accommodation, which you can use by tapping an extra fare reader on the platforms. Line 14 is similar in scale to Line 11 and opened in 2022 with a 50-kilometer route with 18 stations. The line starts at an interchange with Line 11 at Gangxia North and heads northeast on an entirely underground alignment all the way to the northeastern corner of Shenzhen, where it meets the Pingshan Sky Shuttle and Line 16, and has more stops than its very express city center portion. Like Line 11, Line 14 also uses 8-car A-type trains, though in this case without the business class and with fully driverless technology. Line 14 is also unique in Shenzhen as it features some express services that bypass some stations, including directional expresses to the city center during the morning. Line 20 is a modest and kind of odd express line, which opened in 2021 and runs from the Airport North Station on Line 11 northwest to 2 interchanges with Line 12 and the massive new convention center at Shenzhen World. The line's route is just 8 kilometers long or so, with 5 stations entirely underground. Trains on Line 20 are of the 8-car Type A variety, and the line was actually the first in Shenzhen to be fully driverless. Our final line for now might just be the weirdest of all of Shenzhen's metro lines, and it opened in 2022, running as a short spur heading northeast and underground off of what is Line 6 northeasternmost corner, and because of this, it's naturally called Line 6B, for the Line 6 branch. Line 6B is just 6 kilometers long with 4 stations, including one at Sun Yat-sen University's Shenzhen campus, and unlike all of the city's other express lines, and regular Line 6 for that matter, it uses 6-car B-type trains. The reason for this? Good planning, as the line will eventually be able to interoperate with Dongguan Rail Transit's Line 1, which is currently under construction. From here, we can step back and look at the express lines, which currently form a giant arc through Shenzhen, from the airport and convention center at Shenzhen World down through the core business districts and back up to the city's northeast, the oddball Line 6 branch notwithstanding. But I'm sure talking about the massive system, things have felt a bit like a blur, so I want to highlight a few of the city's key interchange stations that interconnect the vast local metro network with the express lines. Probably the most iconic of all Shenzhen metro stations is the massive Gangxian North, which had long been only a stop on Line 2 but became a 4-line interchange in 2022, with lines 10, 11, and 14 being added. The station now features a dramatic circular main hall with an incredible ceiling design and glass-covered tubes for trains on Line 11 and 14, as well as cross-platform connections between the city's 2 main express lines. And speaking of cross-platform interchanges, Shenzhen is among the best Chinese cities for them, with many being reserved and designed in years before they were actually built. Shigong Miao, the other of the city's massive 4-line interchanges, this time connecting lines 1, 11, 7, and 9, is less dramatic than Gangxian North, but has a cool, dark aesthetic with bright LED lights providing contrast and historic art, and another cross-platform interchange between the diagonal sections of lines 7 and 9 that allows passengers to continue east or west without going through the big northern or southern swings that both of these lines do. Huanglugang, which is just a 2-line interchange between lines 7 and 14, also features a lovely cross-platform connection for passengers traveling in the northeast or southwestern direction, and its massive platforms and huge underground concourses are very impressive to behold. But not every big interchange has a cross-platform transfer. Shenzhen North Railway Station is one of the biggest transport hubs in all of China, with its 20 high-speed rail platforms, gargantuan station hall, and 3 metro connections, which are split between lines 4 and 6 flying through the station head house elevated, and line 5 crossing underground perpendicular to them. This section of Line 4 was actually meant to have a multi-station cross-platform interchange setup like the one that exists at the core of the MTR network, but those plans ended up not happening, though the parallel elevated running still harkens to them. The last massive interchange I want to mention is Qianhaiwan, which is at the center of the Qianhai business district, surrounded by enormous high-rises. Unlike Futian, Qianhai sees metro lines radiating out of it as opposed to forming a grid, and Qianhaiwan sees lines 1, 5, and 11 all turning to parallel one another and connect in the massive triple island platform interchange. That really feels like a missed opportunity for some more cross-platform transfers. What's crazy is that Qianhaiwan actually opened before it had any proper entrances, letting passengers change underground while it was surrounded by the construction of the district's high-rises, something that might actually be unique to Shenzhen, certainly for a station of this scale. If you thought Shenzhen's enormous existing metro network meant it had comparably few places left to expand, you'd be wrong, as the cost-effective construction of metro in the city, its role as a core part of the Pearl River Delta region, and its ambitious plans means it's building more metro than almost any other city in the world. So let's look at its plans, rapid fire. Given how long it's taken to make this video, a number of metro projects should have already opened by the time it's released, including the first phase of Line 13, an extension of Line 3, 7 stations to the north on its eastern end, and Line 7, 2 stations north on its western end. These extensions probably open towards the end of the year for reasons I discussed in a previous video. Line 13, the first phase of which should already be open, is another semi-express 100km/h line with 8-car Type A trains that will be operated by MTR, and will run from near Shenzhen Bay, providing another connection to Hong Kong through Hohai, across the mountains to the city's north, and a connection with Line 6B and beyond. In 2025, we can expect to see a bunch more expansion, including a 3-station southern extension to Line 6B, a 1-station extension further east for Line 8, an extension of Line 11, 3 stations east to Lohu, Line 12 north on its western end, and finally an 8-station southern extension of Line 16 that will serve areas north of Yantian District, which are poorly connected today. Further off in the future, and by further off I still mean before 2030, because China builds fast, other extensions are being worked on. Line 14 will be extended one stop west, while Line 20 will be extended past Hohai to Futian to connect with Line 14's extension, turning it into a full-scale cross-city express line. At the same time, construction work is already underway on a bunch of new lines, which when completed will give Shenzhen an over 500 station and 900 kilometer long metro network, which today would be the longest in the world. Most of the remaining lines will be local lines with 80 km/h top speeds and all using A-type trains. Line 15 will loop around Qianhai, the city's first loop, while Line 17 will run north from Luohu to Shenzhen's north. Line 19 will run in the northeast of Shenzhen, making various connections into Line 14, and being a local suburban feeder, this line will use 4-car A-type trains. Line 22 is another semi-express line, with a top speed of 100 km/h, which will run from Futian around the west of the district all the way north to the top of the city. Line 25 will be another orbital line, running from Luohu in the southeast to the northwest, east of Line 6 in the south and south of it in the north. Line 27 is kind of like Line 5, running from Qianhai to the city's center, albeit not via Shenzhen North Station. Line 29 will run from Hohai straight north to the top of the city, while Line 32 is somehow the most modest line of all, being an eastern extension to Line 8. As I hope you can see, Shenzhen's metro almost defies understanding and comprehension. The network is already among the biggest in the world, and it has under construction more metro mileage than all of Berlin and more stations than all of Chicago. Shenzhen may well be the world's future urban rail capital, and I'm sure the city has many more surprises in store. And that's because its metro network is going to get even bigger. In fact, it will over double in size, because plans are already in the works to connect the metro systems of Shenzhen, Dongguan, Guangzhou, and Foshan, which along with Hong Kong would produce a single interconnected metro network around the Pearl River Delta. And to talk all about the integrated Greater Bay Area Transit Network, I've made an exclusive video that you can watch over on Nebula right now. Nebula is the streaming platform owned by me and my creator friends, featuring over 14,000 titles that you can watch ad-free, including exclusive and early access videos from urbanist creators like myself, City Nerd, City Beautiful, Life Where I'm From, and Not Just Bikes. We also now have a news division and a film studio, where some of the very best content creators are making excellent large-scale projects you won't be able to find anywhere else, such as The Getaway, a really exciting Nebula original series from the creators of Jetlag the Game, where 6 different content creators go on a road trip full of exciting games and competitions. Watching my channel on Nebula is one of the best ways you can support my channel and my content as a whole, and as of now, lifetime memberships are back indefinitely for only $300, so you can pay once and get Nebula for as long as both you and Nebula exists, and so Nebula can fund bigger projects in the near future. And if lifetime memberships are not your cup of tea, you can still support me for only $36 a year or $3 a month with our annual plans. We're also now offering annual gift cards so you can share my Nebula exclusive videos with your friends and family too. So go check out Nebula at go.nebula.tv/rmtransit right now.